All right, let's talk about the American Civil War. This wasn't just any conflict. It was one of the most formative and, yeah, ferocious events in all of American history. We're talking about a brutal 4-year struggle that literally pitted brother against brother and ended up completely redefining the nation.
So that really is the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a nation declare war on itself? That's what we're going to dig into. This was a conflict born from divisions so deep they just snapped the country in two, sparking a war on a scale that's almost impossible to imagine.
And when we say unimaginable scale, we mean it. Just look at this number, 700,000. That's the estimated number of soldiers who died. To put that in perspective, that is more than every other American war combined, all the way up through Vietnam. This wasn't some distant conflict. It was a national bloodletting on a truly staggering level. Okay, so how did it get this bad? Let's rewind and look at the breaking point, at the one fundamental issue that really just split the nation right down the middle. You know, you hear a lot of debate today about the causes of the war, but honestly, you don't have to guess. The seceding states, they told us exactly why they were leaving. This quote from Mississippi's own Declaration of Secession says it all. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. It couldn't be more plain. This was the economic engine they were willing to go to war to protect.
So the election of Abraham Lincoln, a man who was openly against the expansion of slavery, well, that was the final trigger. And from there, wow, the dominoes just fell, one after another, with incredible speed. Think about it. In just 5 short months, the United States went from a heated election to the first shots being fired at Fort Sumter. It all happened so fast. And once the war began, it became obvious this was going to be something entirely new. A different kind of conflict, brutal, industrial, and fought on a scale America had just never, ever seen before.
If you want to understand the war, you have to look at the numbers. On paper, it was a total mismatch. The Union had way more people, way more railroads. But the truly killer statistic, look at manufacturing. The North produced 97% of the country's firearms. 97%. That industrial power meant the Union could fight a long, grinding war in a way the South just couldn't possibly match.
And this imbalance shaped their goals. The two sides had completely different ideas of what winning even looked like. For the Union, it was a massive undertaking. They had to invade, conquer, and occupy this huge swath of enemy territory to bring it back. But the Confederacy? They didn't really have to win at all. They just had to not lose. Their whole strategy was to fight a defensive war and just hold on long enough for the North to get tired and give up. And for the first 2 years of the war, it was really anybody's guess who would come out on top. The outcome was far from certain. But then came 1863. This was the year everything changed. It was the pivotal moment when the tide of the war finally, decisively, turned in the Union's favor.
Out in the East, the legendary Confederate General Robert E. Lee decided to go for broke with a big invasion of the North. This led to the Battle of Gettysburg. And while it was a massive victory for the Union, the cost was just horrifying. Over 50,000 casualties in 3 days. This battle was what they call the high water mark of the Confederacy, a devastating blow their main army would never truly recover from.
And here's the crazy part. At almost the exact same time, way out in the West, another general, Ulysses S. Grant, captured the key fortress of Vicksburg. This was an absolute strategic masterpiece. Winning Vicksburg gave the Union total control of the Mississippi River, which basically sliced the Confederacy clean in two.
But there was another huge reason why 1863 was such a turning point. It wasn't just about battles. The very meaning of the war started to change, transforming from a fight to just hold the country together into a revolutionary struggle for human freedom.
And that change was cemented on January 1st, when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, it's really important to understand what this did and what it didn't do. It declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States, the ones currently in rebellion, were now free. But, and this is crucial, it did not apply to the slave states that had actually stayed loyal to the Union.
So this was a brilliant move, not just morally, but strategically. It was a total game changer. Suddenly, the Union Army became an army of liberation. It also pulled the rug out from under the Confederate economy by taking away its workforce. And maybe most importantly, it allowed for the enlistment of black soldiers. Almost 200,000 men joined the fight. Plus, it completely blocked any chance of European countries like Britain or France helping the South. How could they, when the war was now explicitly about ending slavery?
So, with the tide fully turned against them, the Confederacy was now in its final, desperate phase. Their armies were battered, their resources were almost gone, and the stage was set for the end of the war.
Ulysses S. Grant, who is now in charge of all the Union armies, just would not let up. He relentlessly hammered Lee's forces in Virginia in a series of bloody battles. After a brutal 10-month siege, Lee's army had nothing left. He was forced to retreat and finally surrendered at a little town called Appomattox Courthouse. And with that, the war was effectively over.
But the end of the fighting was just the beginning of counting the cost, and the human toll was just devastating. Just let this number sink in for a second. 8%. 8% of all white American men between 13 and 43 died in the war. And in the South, that number was a jaw-dropping 18%. That's nearly 1 out of every 5 men.
And of course, for those who survived, the physical scars were a constant presence. We're talking about an estimated 60,000 men who lost a limb. For decades after the war, these veterans were a common sight, a visible, living reminder of just how brutal the conflict had been.
But once the shooting stopped, a whole new kind of battle began. A battle over the memory of the war itself. A powerful myth started to take hold, especially in the South, known as the Lost Cause. This was an effort to rewrite history, to frame the Confederate cause as a noble fight for states' rights, while intentionally downplaying or even erasing the central role of slavery. And this wasn't just some historical footnote. This narrative would profoundly shape American culture and race relations for more than 100 years.
And that really brings us to the final, lingering question, the one we still wrestle with. The war did settle 2 huge things. It ensured the United States would remain one nation, and it did destroy the institution of slavery. But did it ever truly heal the divisions that caused it in the first place? The deep conflicts over race, rights, and what it even means to be an American? Well, those are still a central part of our story today. You could say the war ended, but in so many ways its echoes never really went away.